Hello. So in this video we're going to talk about Aileen Ritchie's play The Juju Girl. So this is a Scottish play that really explores some of the stories that Scots tell about themselves as related to colonialism. And for me that breaks down into two big categories. One is the idea of Scotland as a sort of internal colony in the UK, and an English colony specifically. And the other is sort of minimizing or even erasing the negative aspects of Scotland's role in British colonialism. So the play is about, there's two interwoven timeline threads. One is contemporary and one is early 20th century. So in the contemporary storyline, you have a Scottish backpacker named Kate, and in the early 20th century storyline, you have her grandparents, Catherine and Andrew. Catherine has grown up in what's now Zimbabwe, what was at the time Rhodesia. She's the daughter of a very famous missionary. Her husband Andrew, or her fiance at the beginning of the play, Andrew, comes from Scotland. He is a missionary as well. So Catherine is the daughter of a missionary and the wife of a missionary throughout most of the play. Kate's a tourist, and she's going to Southern Africa. She's going to Zimbabwe specifically, in part because that is where her grandmother was born, where she grew up. She did missionary work, etc., etc. So one of the things, and so the main storyline focuses on Kate and her adventures, but we also have Catherine and Andrew and their experiences in the early 20th century woven throughout the play. And so we get a picture of that very problematic role that Scottish people played in British colonialism in Africa. Conversion of indigenous peoples, etc., etc. The sort of repression of indigenous culture, and so on and so on. So we get those things. Kate thinks of herself as more enlightened, more sort of modern, more post-colonial, etc., etc. And she is in some ways. But there's also some interesting sort of racial elements with her as well. But she's in Zimbabwe. Her stuff gets stolen when she's on the train, and so she ends up making friends with a group of friends, a group of local people that are all friends. Daniel, give me just a second, I can't remember. Eddie, sorry, I couldn't remember Eddie's name. And then Eddie's servant Martha, who's a refugee from Mozambique. And there are some bits and pieces where Catherine is like, oh, if the economy improves, you guys could become more like Scotland. And Daniel's like, maybe we don't really want to become more like Scotland. Maybe we're happy with Zimbabwe being Zimbabwe and not Scotland. And stuff like this. So we get those bits and pieces in there. But one of the things that was stolen from Kate on the train is the urn of Catherine's ashes, which Kate is bringing back to bury at the mission where Catherine was brought up. They eventually get that back, because Daniel urges Kate to go to the police to try and recover her stuff, and he he says that he figured someone might leave the urn outside the police station because they would think it was juju. It was medicine, as some cultures would call it, like in indigenous North Americans would use the term medicine. Some sort of good luck charm / religious thing, something like this. So someone leaves the urn and they find it. And so Kate, Eddie, and Daniel and Martha go up to where the mission was. And in contrast to the stories that Catherine had told Kate when Kate was a child about it being this sort of idyllic space and they were beloved by the locals and things like this, she in fact finds out that the mission is not regarded positively by the local Shona people, that it's regarded as the ruins of this mission are regarded as a dangerous space, and no one will build anything on them, no one sort of goes there, etc., etc. And so we have that sort of challenging of Scotland's role in the British colonial system. Like Scottish people, large numbers of Scottish people joined the British military and went into colonial service, which to a certain extent does actually connect to the history of Scotland being colonized, because after the 45, after the Jacobite Rebellion in 1745, Scottish culture, Highland culture, was legally repressed, and the only ways in which Scottish men were allowed, for instance, to wear kilts or to legally wear tartan was if they joined the British military in a regiment like the Black Watch, which was legally allowed to wear kilts, tartans, the tam, things like this. Other Scottish people were not allowed to, so a lot of Scottish people joined the military. There's also long periods of economic depression in Scotland in the 18th, 19th centuries, and so a lot of Scots joined the military for that reason as well. But we don't get that sort of military history in this play. We don't have Scots in the army. What we have here is Scottish missionaries, and a lot of Scots did go to Africa, to India, to the Caribbean, to East Asia, wherever it is, to convert people to Christianity, particularly to Presbyterianism. And so that's another element that we have here. And there's an ambivalence about colonial missions nowadays, because they were often sites of cultural genocide. They were often even sites of physical violence against indigenous peoples. Though at the same time, many indigenous people did convert and still follow those religions. So there's good and bad things, but it's problematic for certain. Like it's definitely not this was a good thing. This was at best a mixed thing. So we've got that element, that sort of confrontation of Scotland's guilt or of Scottish people's involvement in the British colonial system, which many Scottish people nowadays are actually quite opposed to. The history of empire is not really something that the Scots are particularly proud of, but it's something that they were definitely involved in. And the other component of this is this idea of Scotland as an internal colony of England. Something not necessarily a full-fledged member of the United Kingdom, maybe, but a state that's been absorbed by sort of great Britain, as opposed to Scotland being its own country. And of course, this is 1999 that this comes out, and there is definitely talk of Scottish independence in the 1990s. I forget what year devolution occurred, but there was the Scottish Parliament at one point was given sort of much greater control over affairs in Scotland. And then in like 2014, there was a big independence referendum in which Scotland very narrowly voted to stay in the UK. So this idea that Scotland is its own country, that should get its own, that should be independent, that it should, in a way, decolonize, is something that's very prevalent in contemporary Scottish culture. And we get this in actually fairly early in the play. Kate is sort of wiping off the grime from the mirror on this train, and it says RR, which Daniel tells her is for Rhodesian Railways. And Kate says, "Colonialism is everywhere. I'm from Scotland. We were colonized by the English too." And Daniel says, "Really? Is Scotland a rich country?" Kate says, "Not really." "Well, I suppose in comparison to here, yes." Daniel says, "It must be. Your ancestors grew rich from our country." Kate says, "My ancestors." Daniel says, "Yes, it was the Scottish who colonized us." Kate says, "I never knew that. We always think of ourselves as the oppressed, the underdogs." So again, we've got this tension and this sort of quest for a reckoning with Scotland's colonial past, both in the sense of what Scotland sort of imagines its cultural position to be, and also its actual participation in imperialist histories. And that's really kind of at the heart of the Juju Girl.